Dell Curry was alone in the stands of the gymnasium. The silence was deafening, only broken by the distant echo of memories reverberating off the empty walls. His fingers caressed the worn surface of an orange basketball, marked by years of use. Tears streamed down his face, and you can perceive that this wasn't a cry of sadness. It was something much deeper. To understand how we got here, he whispered to himself, his voice choked with emotion. We need to go back 25 years, when it all began. In that moment, the weight of an entire journey seemed to rest upon his shoulders. It was a winter night in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the year 1996. The smell of freshly popped popcorn mixed with athletes' sweat filled the Charlotte Coliseum. Dell Curry, then a player for the Charlotte Hornets, had just scored 23 points in another victory. The roar of the crowd still echoed in his ears as he ran to the locker room. But something more important awaited him outside. "Daddy! Daddy!" The high-pitched voice of Seth, his 8-year-old son, cut through the air. The scrawny boy waited anxiously in the hallway, a basketball almost the size of his small torso in his hands. Dell knelt down, touching the boy's forehead with his own, a ritual that would become sacred between them. "Hey there, champ. What would you do if—" Have you ever wondered what moves a father to teach his children about dreams? Dell knew that each dribble, each shot, each fall would be a lesson about life. Steph's eyes sparkled with admiration. "I want to be like you, Dad. I want to play in the NBA." "Son," Dell said softly, feeling the warmth of emotion tighten his chest. "The road won't be easy. You—" "I know, but I train every day," Steph interrupted, full of childish determination. Seth, the younger 6-year-old son, hid behind his father's legs, watching everything with silent attention. The thick tension in the air revealed something none of them yet fully understood, the weight of expectations yet unborn. How is it possible that a simple basketball can carry so many dreams, fears, and hopes? Dell returned home that night with a tightness in his heart. His wife, Sonia, was in the kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the cozy atmosphere. "You're worried about them," she said without looking, knowing every sigh, every silence of her husband after 15 years of marriage. "Steph is so skinny, Sonia," Dell murmured, his voice laden with paternal concern. "And Seth, he barely speaks when the subject is basketball. It's as if he's afraid to compete with his brother," she completed, turning to face him. "Dell, you can't carry this weight alone." What's most impressive is how parents silently carry the fears their children don't yet know. Dell's breathing became heavy. "I just want them to be happy, to find their own paths. But every time I see Steph holding that ball, I see my story repeating." Naturally, this leads us to question: how far does a father's influence go in his children's dreams? 10 years had passed since that magical night at the Charlotte Coliseum. It was 2006 now, and the school gymnasium was filled with college scouts. Steph, now 18 years old, ran across the court with a grace that defied his scrawny frame. His three-point shots were poetry in motion, smooth, precise, impossible to defend. Dell watched from the stands, his heart beating rapidly with each movement, of his son. Beside him, Seth, now 16 years old, watched in silence, hands intertwined, knuckles white from so much tension. "He's going to make it, isn't he, Dad?" Seth asked quietly, his voice trembling slightly. "Of course he will," Dell responded, trying to sound confident. But inside, uncertainty gnawed like a hungry wolf. The game ended with Steph scoring 42 points. an otherworldly performance. The scouts began to stand, talking animatedly. Dell rushed down to meet his son, pride swelling his chest. But then something happened that no one expected. 3 weeks later, letter after letter of rejection arrived. Duke, North Carolina, Kentucky. All the major universities said the same thing. Too small, too scrawny, doesn't have the necessary physique for high-level basketball. Dell found Steph sitting alone in the backyard, under the old oak tree where they used to practice. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the boy's face, and silent tears ran down his cheeks. The silence weighed like 1,000 unspoken words. "They don't want me, Dad," Steph said, his voice broken by raw emotion. "Everyone says I'm too small, that I'll never make it." Dell felt his heart shatter. How can a father see his son suffer and not feel each stab of pain as if it were his own? He sat beside Steph, putting his arm around the boy's thin shoulders. "Son, let me tell you something. The real game is played off the courts." "What does that mean?" Steph asked, confused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "It means," Dell began, choosing each word carefully, "that size doesn't determine greatness. Resilience does. And you, Steph, you have something they can't measure with a ruler or measuring tape." "What?" "Heart. Determination. The capacity to get up when everyone says to stay down. You can perceive that this moment would become the foundation of everything that would come after." That night, Dell couldn't sleep. He tossed from side to side, in bed, the weight of responsibility pressing on his chest like a giant rock. "Did I do the right thing?" he whispered to Sonia in the comforting darkness of the bedroom, encouraging him to follow this dream. What if he only gets hurt more? Sonia turned to him, her hand finding his under the sheets. "Dell, you're not raising basketball players. You're raising men. And men need to learn that life will knock them down, but also that they can get up." "And Seth?" Dell asked, his voice laden with guilt. "He barely touches the subject. It's as if he's given up before even starting." "Or," Sonia said gently, "it's as if he's waiting for his own moment, his own story." How many times in life do we confuse silence with giving up, when in reality it's preparation? 2 months passed in a whirlwind of anxiety and hope. The call came on a rainy Tuesday. Davidson College, a small university in North Carolina that few knew, offered a full scholarship to Steph. "Davidson?" Steph repeated on the phone, trying to hide the disappointment in his voice. "But it's not Duke. It's not North Carolina." Dell heard the conversation from the other room and felt the familiar stab of paternal pain. He knew what his son was thinking, that accepting Davidson was admitting defeat, was accepting to be less than others. But then, something extraordinary happened. Seth entered Steph's room that night. Dell, passing through the hallway, stopped upon hearing the low voices of the brothers. "Dude," Seth said, his voice firm for the first time in months, "it doesn't matter where you play. You're the best I've ever seen, and one day everyone will know." "Do you really think so?" Steph asked, vulnerable. "I don't think. I know. And you know why?" Seth paused, and Dell could imagine the boy looking directly into his brother's eyes. "Because I see you train when no one's watching. I see you wake up at 5 in the morning to shoot. That's the real game, bro. The game that's played off. The courts." Dell leaned against the hallway wall, tears springing unexpectedly. His sons had understood. The lesson had been planted, and now it germinated in their hearts. It's impossible not to feel the power of brothers who support each other even when the world says they should compete. Steph accepted Davidson's offer. On the morning of departure for university, Dell woke early and went down to the backyard. The grass was still wet with dew. The fresh morning air carried the scent of new possibilities. He picked up the worn basketball, the same one Steph had used since childhood, and stood there, feeling its weight in his hands. "What are you doing, love?" Sonia asked from the back door, a steaming coffee mug in her hands. "Trying to remember," Dell replied, his voice hoarse with emotion, "that being a father isn't about protecting our children from falls. It's about teaching them to get up." She approached, wrapping him in a side embrace. "And you did that. You both did. Isn't it incredible how the most difficult moments of fatherhood are often the most transformative?" When the car departed with Steph to Davidson, Seth stood on the sidewalk waving until he disappeared around the curve. Dell watched his younger son, noticing something different in his posture. A quiet determination, a lit flame that didn't exist before. "Seth," Dell called softly. The boy turned, and Dell saw tears in his eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. "Your time will come too, son. Your own path, your own story." Seth nodded, quickly wiping his eyes. "I know, Dad. And when it comes, I'll be ready. Because the real game is played off the courts, right?" Dell smiled, feeling pride flood every cell of his body. "Exactly, champ. Exactly." That night, Dell returned to the empty school gymnasium where Steph had played his last game. He sat alone in the stands, the worn ball in his hands, and let the tears flow freely. They were tears of fear for the unknown future. Tears of pride for the men his boys were becoming. Tears of gratitude for each moment, each challenge, each victory and each defeat that had shaped them until there. The echo of his own footsteps resonated in the empty gymnasium as he walked to the three-point line. He bounced the ball once, twice, 3 times. The familiar sound, tock, 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 echoed like a beating heart. He shot. The ball flew in a perfect arc, spinning in the air as if dancing with destiny. Swish! And in that moment, Dell knew something greater was in motion. A story was just beginning. A journey that would test not just athletic skills, but the true meaning of family, brotherhood, and unconditional love. Something that touches deeply is when we realize that life's greatest challenges aren't about winning. They're about becoming who we truly are. The ball bounced softly on the empty court, the sound echoing like a promise of what was to come. Dell picked up the ball again, pressed it against his chest, and whispered, to the empty gymnasium, "Thank you, God. Thank you for allowing me to be the father of these boys. No matter what happens, this is already worth everything." And as he walked outside, the sound of his footsteps mixed with the echo of a future not yet written, but already full of infinite possibilities. The real game was just beginning. 4 years had passed since Steph first stepped on the Davidson College campus. The cold March morning air carried the smell of freshly cut grass and unfulfilled promises. Dell Curry sat in his office in Charlotte, the phone glued to his ear, listening to his son's excited voice echo through the line. "Dad, you won't believe it. We just won another one. We're going to the NCAA tournament," Steph shouted, his voice vibrating with an energy that made Dell's heart race. In that instant, you can perceive that something extraordinary was happening. A boy everyone said was too small was proving that size was never the issue. "I knew it, son," Dell responded, trying to control the emotion that threatened to break his voice. "I always knew you could do it." But while Steph's joy filled one side of the phone line, on the other side of the house, Seth sat in silence on the living room sofa, his eyes fixed on the television, watching highlights of his brother scoring 35 points against teams much bigger, much stronger, much more everything. How is it possible that pride and envy can coexist in the same heart? Seth was 20 years old now, in his second season at Liberty University. Things weren't going as planned. He had started at Duke, following the footsteps that Steph never got to take. But after a year in the shadows, without playing time, without recognition, he made the most difficult decision of his life. Transfer to a smaller school? It's the right choice, he murmured to himself every night, trying to believe his own words. But doubt gnawed like a hungry wolf. Sonia entered the room, sensing the thick tension in the air. She knew that silence. It was the same silence Seth had carried since childhood, when he watched Steph train to exhaustion. "Seth, dear," she said softly, sitting beside him. "Are you happy at Liberty?" "I'm fine, Mom," he responded automatically, without taking his eyes off the screen. "Fine isn't happy," she insisted, placing her hand on his. "And you don't need to carry this alone." What would you do if you lived your entire life in the shadow of someone you love more than anything? Seth finally turned to face her, and Sonia saw tears shining in the corners of his eyes. "I don't want people to think I'm competing with him, Mom. Steph he's special. I just want to find my own path." "And you will find it," she assured, pulling him into an embrace. "But remember what your father always says? The real game is played off the courts," they said together, and for the first time in weeks, Seth sketched a small smile. Meanwhile, 1,000 kilometers away, Steph was living a fairy tale no one could have predicted. Davidson College, the small school no one knew, was shocking the college basketball world. Tyler Brooks, his roommate and best friend on the team, came running into the dorm. "Steph! Dude, did you see the headlines? They're calling you the baby-faced assassin." Steph laughed, but there was a strange feeling in the air, a mixture of euphoria and responsibility that weighed on his thin shoulders. "It's kind of surreal, Tyler. Like, is this even real?" "More real than anything I've ever lived," Tyler replied, throwing himself on the bed. "But hey, how's Seth? I heard he transferred from Duke." Steph's smile disappeared for an instant. "He's processing. It's not easy for him, you know? Everyone always comparing, always asking, 'Are you Steph Curry's brother?'" Brandon Foster, another teammate, poked his head through the door. "Hey, Steph, Coach Robert Kim wants to talk to you. Something about NBA scouts at the next game." NBA. That's he. Word hung in the air like distant thunder, loaded with meaning that couldn't yet be fully understood. Isn't it incredible how dreams can become so real that we start to fear them? That night, Steph called Seth. The phone rang 4 times before being answered. "Hi, bro," Seth said, trying to sound casual. "Hey, brother, how's Liberty?" Steph asked, walking nervously around the dorm. "It's different, but I'm getting more playing time." An uncomfortable silence hung between them, heavy with all. The unspoken words. Steph took a deep breath. "Seth, I know things aren't easy for you, and I wanted to say that—" "You don't need to say anything," Seth interrupted, his voice firmer now. "You're killing it, bro, and I'm proud. Really. But I feel like somehow "Steph, stop," Seth said gently. "Remember when we were kids and you taught me to shoot? You stayed with me 3 straight hours until I made my first free throw. Of course I remember. That hasn't changed. We haven't changed. We're just growing. And growth hurts sometimes." Seth paused, choosing his next words carefully. The real game is played off the courts, right? And this game of being brothers, we've already won, Steph. It doesn't matter where I play or where you play. Steph felt tears burn his eyes. It's impossible not to feel the power of fraternal love when it manifests in its purest form. Dell, listening to the conversation from downstairs through the intercom that Seth had forgotten to turn off, needed to go outside to the backyard. The night was cold, the starry sky like a promise of infinite possibilities. He walked to the old basketball hoop, touching the worn net with his fingers. "You did a good job," Sonia said softly, appearing beside him with 2 coats. "They did," Dell corrected, putting on the coat she offered him. "They understood something that took me years to learn." "What?" "That success without connection means nothing. That victories empty of love are defeats in disguise." He looked at the stars, feeling a deep gratitude flood his being. "They're playing the real game, Sonia. The game off the courts." How many times in life do we forget that the greatest victories don't appear on scoreboards? The following months were a whirlwind of emotions for both brothers. Steph continued his triumphant march with Davidson, taking the small college to places no one ever imagined possible. Each game was a statement. Each three-point shot was an answer to everyone who said he couldn't. But Seth was on his own journey, quieter, more personal. He transferred again, this time to Duke, not to compete with his brother's memory, but because he finally had enough confidence to walk his own path. "Are you sure?" Dell asked when Seth announced the decision. Seth nodded, his eyes shining with a determination Dell recognized immediately. It was the same determination he saw in Steph years ago, sitting under the oak tree, swearing to prove everyone wrong. "I need to do this, Dad. Not for anyone, but for myself. I need to know I can face my fears. And if it doesn't work out, then at least I tried. And that's already more than giving up without fighting." Seth touched his chest, where his heart beat strongly. "The real game is played off the courts, remember? And this is my game, Dad. My fight." Something that touches deeply is when we see our children become men before our eyes. The news arrived on a sunny April afternoon. Steph had were declared for the NBA draft. In a few months, he would be a professional player. Dell was at work when he received the call. His hand trembled as he held the phone, listening to his oldest son's emotional voice talking about agents, contracts, dreams becoming reality. "I'm so proud of you, son," Dell said, his voice laden with all the emotions a father can feel. So proud." But even while celebrating, a concern nestled in his heart. Seth was still struggling to find his place. As a father, how do you balance the joy of one son without diminishing the struggle of the other? The night of the NBA draft arrived like a hurricane of emotions. The Curry family gathered in the living room, the television on, hearts beating in unison. Steph was in New York, waiting for his name to be called. With the 7th pick in the 2009 NBA draft, the Golden State Warriors select Steph Curry from Davidson College. The room exploded in shouts of joy. Sonia cried. Dell smiled with tears in his eyes. Relatives jumped and embraced each other. But Seth stood still for a moment, absorbing everything. Then he began to applaud, loud, steady, genuinely happy for his brother. Dell watched him, seeing the internal struggle, the battle between pride and envy, between love and comparison. And then he saw something beautiful happen. Seth chose love. "He did it, Dad," Seth said, turning to Dell with a genuine smile on his lips. "Our bro did it. You both did it, Dell corrected, pulling Seth into a tight embrace. In different ways, but both of you did it. What's most impressive is how true character reveals itself, not in moments of personal glory, but in genuine joy for others' victories. Weeks later, Seth received his own news. No team had chosen him in the draft. The rejection hurt like 1,000 needles piercing his heart. But this time, something was different. Steph flew back to Charlotte immediately. He found Seth in the same place where Dell had found him, years ago, under the old oak tree in the backyard. "Hey," Steph said softly, sitting beside his brother. "Hey," Seth responded, without looking up. "You know what? Not being chosen doesn't mean the story is over. It means you're going to write a different chapter." Seth finally looked at his brother. "How do you handle it? All the pressure, all the expectations?" Steph smiled, picking up the old basketball that was beside them. "Remember what Dad always said? The real game is played off the courts," they said together. "Exactly. And you know what the real game is now?" Steph asked, bouncing the ball softly. "It's to continue. It's not giving up. It's proving to yourself, not to others. Have you ever wondered what happens when giving up isn't an option?" Seth took a deep breath, feeling the weight begin to dissipate. "Do you think I can still make it?" "I don't think. I know. And you know why?" Steph placed the ball in his brother's hands. "Because I've seen you train when no one was watching. Saw you get up every time you fell. That, bro. That's what separates those who make it from those who give up." Dell watched everything from the kitchen window, Sonia beside him. They saw Steph put his arm around Seth, saw the two brothers sitting under the tree, sharing something deeper than any trophy or million-dollar contract. "They're going to be okay," Sonia whispered. "More than okay," Dell responded, feeling a deep peace fill his chest. "They have each other. And that's worth more than any championship." Naturally, this leads us to understand that life's true wealth isn't in individual victories, but in the connections we create along the way. 2 weeks later, Seth signed as a free agent with the Memphis Grizzlies. It wasn't dramatic like Steph's draft, didn't have cameras or spotlights. It was quiet, discreet, exactly as Seth had always been. But when he called to tell the news, Steph dropped everything and ran home. They celebrated that night, not with extravagant parties, but with pizza in the living room, playing video games, laughing like children. "We both made it," Seth said at some point in the night, looking at his brother with gratitude in his eyes. "We both made it," Steph confirmed, extending his fist for a greeting. Brothers in the NBA. Dell and Sonia watched from the kitchen door, hearts overflowing with pride. Two different paths, two unique journeys, but a shared destiny. The NBA. "Did you know this was going to happen?" Sonia asked quietly. "No," Dell admitted, putting his arm around her. "But I hoped. Because if there's something I learned all these years, it's that the size of the heart always surpasses the size of the body." The following years were a roller coaster for Seth. He was released, hired again, played for several teams, always fighting for his place. Meanwhile, Steph became a superstar, revolutionizing basketball with his impossible shots. But something was about to happen that would test everything they had built. Something that would force Dell to make the most difficult decision of his life. Because soon, Steph and Seth wouldn't just be brothers in the NBA. They would be rivals, and Dell would have to choose a side. What happens when competition enters a home built on unconditional love? No one could imagine that this moment would be the turning point of everything. The air inside Oracle Arena was charged with an energy Dell Curry had never felt before. It was November 2, 2016, and for the first time in history, Steph and Seth would face each other as direct adversaries on an NBA court. Golden State Warriors against Dallas Mavericks. Brother against brother. Dell stood in the stadium hallway, holding 2 tickets in his trembling hands. One ticket would place him behind the Golden State bench, where Steph played. The other, behind the Dallas bench, where Seth had finally found his place as a starter. How does a father choose between his children? "Mr. Curry," the voice of an attendant called softly. "The game starts in 15 minutes. You need to decide which seat you'll use." Dell looked at the tickets as if they were death sentences. His breathing was heavy, his racing heart hammering against his ribs. I don't know," he admitted, his voice choked. Sonia appeared beside him, gently touching his arm. "Love, it doesn't matter where you sit. They know you love them both." "But the media, Sonia, the photographers, everyone will see. They'll turn this into a headline." Dell ran his hand over his face, feeling the weight of decades of fatherhood pressing on his shoulders. "Have you ever wondered what weighs more? Loving too much? Or having to prove that love publicly?" In the locker rooms, the tension was palpable in completely different ways. Steph sat at his locker, tying his sneakers with mechanical movements. His teammates, Jason Martinez and Alex Chen, tried to keep the mood light, but noticed something was different that night. "Hey, Steph," Jason called. "Going easy on your little brother today?" Steph didn't respond immediately. His fingers stopped in the middle of the lace, and for a moment, the entire locker room seemed to hold its breath. "No," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "Seth wouldn't want that. And I respect him too much not to give my best." On the other side of the hallway, Seth was going through the same emotional whirlwind. Connor Smith, his teammate on the Mavericks, sat beside him. "Dude, you okay? You look like you're going to throw up." Seth let out a nervous laugh. "It's strange, you know. Our whole lives we played side by side. And now you're professionals," Connor completed. "It's just a game, bro." "No," Seth corrected, looking directly into his friend's eyes. "It's not just a game. It never was. Because the real game is played off the courts. Isn't it incredible how childhood lessons echo in life's most crucial moments?" Dell finally made a decision no one expected. He chose to sit in the middle of the stadium, between the 2 fan bases, wearing a half-Warriors, half-Mavericks shirt, a homemade creation by Sonia that divided the colors of the 2 teams perfectly down the middle. The cameras found him immediately. The commentators went into ecstasy. "Look at this, folks. Dell Curry literally divided between his 2 sons." But Dell wasn't paying attention to the circus around him. His eyes were fixed on the court, where Steph and Seth met at center court for the traditional greeting before the game. The brothers faced each other. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then Seth extended his hand, and Steph took it firmly. "No mercy?" Seth asked, a small smile on his lips. "No mercy," Steph confirmed, squeezing his brother's hand. "But always brothers." "Always brothers," Seth repeated. And in that instant, Dell felt something break inside him. Not from pain, but from pride so deep it was almost unbearable. The game began like an emotional hurricane. Every time Steph shot, Dell held his breath. Every time Seth scored, his heart jumped. It was a beautiful torture, a delicious pain that only a father could understand. In the second quarter, the moment happened that no one would forget. Seth stole the ball from Steph. It wasn't a common steal. It was clean, technical, perfect. He ran for the counterattack, and, with Steph desperately running behind him, Seth jumped and dunked the ball with an authority that left the entire arena silent for a second. Then Seth turned to Steph and said something that only the court microphones caught. "Sorry, bro, but you taught me to never give up on a play." Steph stopped, looked at his brother, and for the first time that night, smiled genuinely. "Touché, brother. Touché." It's impossible not to feel the love that transcends competition when we witness moments like this. Dell watched everything with tears in his eyes. Sonia squeezed his hand so hard she was leaving marks. But neither of them cared. "They're okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "They're more than okay," Dell responded, his voice hoarse with emotion. They understood. At the third quarter break, Dell needed to go outside for air. The hallway was empty, the echo of his steps reverberating like heartbeats. He leaned against the cold wall, closing his eyes, allowing the memories to flood him. He saw child Steph, crying under the oak tree after the rejections. He saw Seth watching, silently from the side, always present, always supporting. He saw both growing, stumbling, rising, stumbling again. What's most impressive is how fathers carry each moment of their children's lives like sacred scars in their hearts. The last quarter was an epic battle. Steph scored 32 points. Seth scored 26. Each basket was a statement. Each defense was a lesson. Each exchanged look was a story of fraternal love disguised as competition. With 2 minutes to go, Warriors winning. By only 3 points, Seth had the ball for a 3-point shot that could tie the game. The entire gymnasium stood. Dell couldn't breathe. Sonia closed her eyes, unable to watch. Seth shot. The ball flew in a perfect arc, spinning in the air like a ballet of hopes and dreams. Swish. Tie. And then something extraordinary happened. Steph, instead of being frustrated, gave a small smile and nodded to Seth, a gesture of recognition, of respect, of "well played, brother." You can perceive that, there, in that moment, transcended any scoreboard or statistic. Golden State ended up winning the game in the last seconds, but when the final whistle blew, the first thing Steph did was look for Seth. They met at center court, and the embrace they shared said more than 1,000 words could express. "You played amazing," Steph said in his brother's ear. "You too," Seth responded, tightening the embrace. "Proud of you, bro." "Proud of us," Steph corrected. Dell couldn't hold back anymore. He ran down from the stands, Sonia right behind. Security guards tried to stop him, but Nathan Williams, the Warriors' assistant coach, waved to let them pass. When Dell reached the court, his sons turned simultaneously. And there, in the middle of thousands of people, cameras, spotlights, and history being made, the three embraced. "My boys," Dell cried openly, without shame, without restrictions. "My beautiful boys." "We love you, Dad," they said together, their voices mixing in perfect harmony. Something that touches deeply is realizing that a family's love is the only trophy that truly matters. At the press conference after the game, a reporter asked Steph how he felt playing against his brother. Steph thought for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "You know, I was taught as a child that the real game is played off the courts. And today I completely understood what that means." "Can you elaborate?" the reporter insisted. "It means I can give my best, compete fiercely, and still hug my brother at the end and say, 'I love you.' It means victory isn't about defeating someone. but about surpassing yourself. And it means—" Steph paused, emotion breaking his voice. "It means having my brother in the NBA with me is worth more than any championship I could win." In the Mavericks interview room, Seth was answering the same question. "It was the hardest and easiest game of my life," he said, a smile on his lips. "Hard because you desperately want to win. Easy because, no matter the result, I knew that at the end of the day, I'd still have my brother." How many times in life do we forget that people are more important than victories? That night marked a before and after in the Curry brothers' relationship. They continued facing each other on the court. Seth following his journey through different teams, always proving his worth, always showing that the Curry name didn't belong only to Steph. And Dell never had to choose a side again, because he finally understood there were no sides, just two different paths leading to the same truth: the unconditional love of a family. Years passed. Steph accumulated championships with the Warriors. Seth built his respectable career as one of the league's best shooters, wearing jerseys from Dallas, Philadelphia, Brooklyn. Different paths, but united by the same love, the same family, the same mutual respect. And then came 2022, and All-Star Weekend brought a surprise no one expected. 5 years had passed since that first unforgettable confrontation between brothers. Dell was again in a gymnasium, but this time it was the United Center in Chicago, on the night of the 2022 All-Star Game. In his hands, the same worn basketball that had witnessed decades of dreams, tears, and triumphs. But now he wasn't alone. "Unbelievable, isn't it?" Sonia said beside him, squeezing his hand. Dell could only nod, his eyes fixed on the court where something historic was about to happen. For the first time in their lives, Steph and Seth would be honored together on basketball's biggest stage. Not as teammates, but as two brothers who conquered the impossible, each in their own journey. You can perceive that some moments are so perfect they seem to have been written by destiny. In Team LeBron's locker room, Steph was silent, his teammates noticing a different energy in him. "Steph, you okay?" asked Owen Garcia, his Warriors teammate. "It's just surreal," Steph responded, tying his sneakers slowly. "Remember when we were kids and watched the All-Star together? Seth used to say, 'One day we'll be there, bro. Together.' And you made it," Owen smiled. "It's not about making it," Steph corrected gently. "It's about realizing the journey was worth every second, every rejection, every doubt, every difficult moment. Everything brought us here." On the other side, in Team Durant's locker room, Seth was living the same emotional whirlwind. Liam Rodriguez, his teammate on the Brooklyn Nets where he now played, sat beside him. "Big moment, huh? You and Steph at the All-Star." Seth smiled, but his eyes shone with contained tears. "You know what's most incredible? It's not being here. It's that, after everything, we're still best friends, still support each other, still are brothers. How is it possible that competition can strengthen instead of destroy?" Dell and Sonia sat beside Isha, Steph's wife, and other family members. Though tension in the air was different this time. It wasn't fear or anxiety, but pure anticipation, anticipated joy. "Mommy, is Grandpa crying?" asked Riley, Dell's granddaughter and Steph's daughter, pointing to the silent tears running down her grandfather's face. Sonia stroked the girl's hair. "They're happy tears, dear. Very, very happy." Dell didn't even try to hide the emotions. How can a man hide the pride of seeing his two sons reach the absolute top of their dreams? The announcer announced the lineups. When the name Steph Curry echoed through the gymnasium, the crowd exploded. When Seth Curry was called moments later, Dell needed to sit, his legs trembling. "Breathe, love," Sonia whispered, holding him firmly. I'm just. Dell couldn't finish the sentence. Too much emotion for words. Isn't it incredible how parents carry each victory of their children as if it were their own, multiplied by millions? The game began as a star show, but there was something special in the air every time Steph and Seth crossed paths on the court. In a magical moment of the second quarter, something happened that no one expected. Steph had the ball on offense. Seth came to guard him. They faced each other for a second, and then Steph did something surprising. He passed the ball to Seth. "Here, bro," Steph said with a smile. "Your turn to shine." Seth caught the ball, completely surprised. For a moment, the All-Star game stopped being a competition and became something much bigger. "Are you sure?" Seth asked, incredulous. "I always have been," Steph responded, backing up to give space to his brother. Seth shot from 3. The entire gymnasium held its breath. Swish. The crowd went wild, but what happened next was even more special. Steph ran to Seth and hugged him, in the middle of the game, in front of thousands of people, breaking all the unwritten rules of competition. "Proud of you, bro," Steph whispered in Seth's ear. "Proud of us," Seth responded, tightening the embrace. Dell was standing, crying openly now, not caring about the cameras or anything. Sonia beside him also cried, as did half the arena. It's impossible not to feel the power of love when it manifests so purely and publicly. At halftime, something extraordinary happened. The All-Star organizers made a surprise tribute to the Curry brothers. A video showing their journey from children to that moment. Images of skinny Steph being rejected. Seth always beside him, supporting. Dell teaching in the backyard. The childhood promise of reaching the top together. When the video ended, the announcer called Dell to the court. "Mr. Dell Curry, please come here." Dell was in shock. Sonia pushed him gently. "Go, love. This moment is yours too." He walked trembling to center court, where Steph and Seth waited with huge smiles on their faces. "Dad," Steph began, the microphone in his hand, "we have something to tell you." Seth took another microphone. "During all these years, you taught us that the real game is played off the courts. And today," Steph continued, "we want the world to know that our greatest trophy isn't in any showcase." "Our greatest trophy," they said together, placing their hands over Dell's heart, "is right here. It's you, Dad." The entire gymnasium stood in ovation. 20,000 people applauding not the basketball players, but a father who had dedicated his life to teaching his children about love, resilience, and family. Dell fell to his knees, sobbing, and his sons knelt with him, embracing him at the center of the world's most famous court at that moment. Have you ever wondered how much love can fit in a single embrace? After the game, already at the hotel, Dell sat alone on the balcony, watching the lights of Chicago. The worn ball was beside him. He took it everywhere now, a talisman of memories. Steph and Seth appeared at the door. "Still awake, Dad?" Seth asked softly. Dell turned, smiling through the tears that seemed to have no end that day. "How could I sleep after a day like this?" The sons sat beside him, the three observing the illuminated city in comfortable silence. "You know," Dell began finally, "I spent years afraid. Afraid that competition between you would destroy the love. Afraid that one's success would overshadow the other. Afraid I hadn't been a good father." "Dad," Steph began, But Dell raised his hand. Let me finish. Today I realized all those fears were nonsense. You didn't just understand what I tried to teach. You transformed it into something much bigger. Seth took the worn ball from his father's hands. This ball, Dad, it represents everything. Each missed shot, each hit, each fall, each rise. It's our story, Steph completed. And this story isn't about basketball. It never was. It's about family, all three said together. What's most impressive is how the simplest moments can contain the deepest truths. There's something I need to tell you, Dad, Seth said, breaking the silence. Dell looked curious. What? Steph smiled. Remember when we played against each other for the first time as professionals? And you were divided about where to sit? How could I forget? When I saw you there with that divided shirt. Seth paused, emotional. In that moment, I understood you never had to choose, because your love for us both has always been complete, not divided. And it was there, Steph continued, that we realized we had succeeded, not just reaching the NBA, but keeping our brotherhood intact despite being rivals. Dell shook his head, tears in his eyes. You always surprise me. We learned from the best, they said in unison. Steph stood, walking to the balcony railing. You know what the real moment was when we made you cry with pride, Dad? Today? Dell ventured. No, Seth denied, joining his brother. It was that day, 20 years ago, when you found us in the backyard, when you taught us that falling wasn't failing, when you planted the seed of what we became. Today, Steph continued, was just the celebration of everything we built. Each game where we competed, each embrace after the competition, each moment where we proved that being rivals doesn't mean being enemies. Exactly, Seth completed. The real miracle happened when you chose to be more than a coach, when you chose to be a father who taught about life, not just basketball. Dell joined them, the three men watching the city in the distance, 3 generations of love, condensed in a perfect moment. The real game is played off the courts, Dell murmured. And we won that game, his sons responded in unison, each one walking their own path, but always united as family. Naturally, this leads us to understand that true success isn't measured only in individual trophies, but in the love that remains intact despite all battles. The next morning, before each went their way, Steph back to Golden State, Seth to Brooklyn, Dell and Sonia home, they gathered one. Last time, Dell held the worn ball, looking at it as if seeing it for the first time. This ball, he said thoughtfully, saw us grow, cry, laugh, win, and lose. Then it saw us live, Steph said simply. Dell nodded, then did something unexpected. He passed the ball to Steph, who passed it to Seth, who passed it back to Dell, as they had done 1,000 times before, but now each pass carried decades of meaning. Thank you, Dell said finally, his voice laden with all the emotion a father can feel, for letting me be part of your journey. Dad, Seth said gently, you weren't part of the journey. You were the foundation on which we built everything. And whenever we need to remember who we are, Steph added, touching his father's forehead with his, the sacred ritual that defined them, we'll remember you, your love, and that the real game is played off the courts. Something that touches deeply is realizing that a father's love is the most valuable legacy anyone can leave. Later, when they asked Dell about the moment his sons made him cry with pride, he smiled and said, it wasn't a moment. It was a lifetime of moments, and each one was a gift. When they asked Steph about his greatest achievement, he pointed to his relationship with Seth and said, "This, having a brother I can compete fiercely against on the court, but who remains my best friend off it. That's the real championship." And when they asked Seth if he ever felt jealous of Steph's success, he laughed and responded, "Jealousy? Never. Pride? Always. Each title of his motivates me to work harder. Each game against him makes me better. Because at the end of the day, we're still brothers. And that's worth more than any rivalry. Because in the end, what really matters isn't just the points scored, the championships won, or the records broken. What matters is that two boys who were taught about unconditional love transformed that lesson into the foundation of their lives, building separate careers but celebrating each other's conquests, proving you can be fierce rivals on the court and inseparable brothers off it. And Dell Curry, the man who started with fear that rivalry would destroy the love between his sons, discovered he had planted seeds that blossomed into something much bigger, a brotherhood that transcended courts, teams, and competitions. The worn ball is still in his house, a daily reminder that the greatest legacies aren't built in stadiums, but in the hearts of those we love. And every time Dell looks at that ball, he doesn't see an object. He sees two boys running in the backyard, laughing, stumbling, rising, dreaming. He sees each game where one faced the other with maximum respect. He sees embraces at center court after intense battles. He sees the most beautiful story he ever lived, the story of a family that understood that love and competition can coexist perfectly. And that game never ends. It just continues, passing from generation to generation, like a ball being passed between loving hands.